Hello everyone, this is Israeli Politics for Dummies, brought to you by DC and Jerusalem as part of our video series on Israeli politics. In this video we're going to get acquainted with the Israeli parliament, called the Knesset, and learn, roughly speaking, what the partisan divides are in Israel. So to begin with, who is this guy here, who, at least in this picture, appears to be pretty happy? Well, this is Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, or Bibi for short. And he's a big part of the reason there's been so much focus on Israeli politics lately. He's been involved in a long-running feud with President Obama, and more importantly, he won re-election in March of 2015, which is why he's waving to the crowd in this picture. He represents the right-of-center Likud party. But what do terms like right, left, and center mean in Israel? If you've followed politics outside of the US, you know that the political spectrum is different from country to country, and the US tends to be different from most European political systems. To understand Israel's partisan divide, we first need to understand the social divides. Israeli social divisions. An essential part of understanding Israeli politics is understanding the ethnic and religious divides that define this country of just over 8 million people. There are three major divides in Israel, based upon religion, ethnicity, and nationality. The most visible division within Israel is the religious divide. It's easiest to think of it in terms of the roughly 1/3 of Jews who are religious versus the 2/3 who are not, but that's a gross simplification. In reality, religiosity is best thought of as a continuum, and there is a wide spectrum of religiosity in Israel, ranging from completely secular on one extreme to ultra-Orthodox on the other. In between there are traditional Jews, the largest category in Israel, who, while not strictly Orthodox, do keep many customs and identify religiously as Jews. There are also the national religious, a more modern strain of Orthodoxy, which embraces both modern Zionism and religious traditionalism. As in the United States, religiosity in Israel tends to correlate with more conservative politics and voting patterns. The Jewish ethnic divide in Israel between Ashkenazi and Sephardi or Mizrahi Jews is probably the one that Americans can understand the most, since it has some superficial similarities to the racial black-white paradigm, including lingering accusations of Ashkenazi elitism. Ashkenazi Jews are the Jews who immigrated to Israel from Europe, mostly from Eastern Europe, while Sephardi or Mizrahi Jews are those who immigrated to Israel from the Middle East and North Africa. When Israel was founded in 1948, 80% of the population was Ashkenazi. But today, due to immigration and differences in the birth rate, just over half of Israeli Jews are Sephardi or Mizrahi, and just under half are Ashkenazi. Sephardi Jews tend to be at the lower end of the socio-economic scale compared to Ashkenazim. Sephardic Jews are generally more religious compared to Ashkenazim. Most Sephardic Jews are either religious or traditional, whereas Ashkenazim are far more likely to be secular. Sephardim tend to be towards the right side of the political spectrum and more likely to support the Likud, while Ashkenazim tend to lean towards the left and are more likely to vote for the Labour Party. The third social division in Israel is the deepest. It's between Israeli Jews and Israeli non-Jews, most of whom are Muslim Arabs. About 25% of Israeli citizens are not Jewish, including 20% who are Israeli Arabs. Today, many Arabs in Israel identify not as Israelis but as Palestinians. A large portion of Israeli Arabs vote for the anti-Zionist Arab parties, which regularly win about 10% of the Knesset seats. Other Israeli Arabs vote for the Zionist left, while small numbers also vote for the Israeli right, and even the Orthodox parties. Now let's look at the kinds of issues that are in Israeli politics. There are three major political issues in Israel: foreign policy and national security, the relationship between religion and state, and the cost of living. Okay, so the first one is foreign policy and security, and for obvious reasons, foreign policy and security have dominated Israeli politics since the country was founded in 1948 up until today. Today, this includes hot-button topics like the future of the West Bank and Israeli settlements there, relations with the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, and of course Iran's nuclear program. Religion and state. Unlike in the US, where there is a clear separation of church and state, Israel is defined as a Jewish state. Since the founding of Israel in 1948, no clear consensus has been established on issues like civil marriage, public transportation on the Sabbath, and funding for religious schools. The pre-state status quo, which has been modified occasionally over the years, has acted as an effective compromise between the Orthodox and secular reformers. The cost of living. Israel was founded as a big government socialist state. Compared to the US, there has been much less room for the government to expand. Therefore, economic reform has generally been towards giving more economic freedom and greater market involvement. Beginning in the late 70s and the 1980s, the Israeli government embarked on a number of free market reforms liberalizing the economy. The growth of regulations was curbed, some industries were privatized, and taxes were lowered. While Israel's economy over the past quarter century has prospered, socialists and social democrats have objected to these changes, arguing that greater government involvement is needed to stave off rising housing prices and to reduce the growing gaps between the rich and poor. Okay, so now let's look at Israel's political parties. As a parliamentary system, Israel has many political parties, unlike the US, which has only 2 major parties. Right now there are 10 parties that have representation in the Knesset. Those 10 parties can be grouped together into 5 blocs. The Zionist party blocs fit nicely on the right-left political spectrum, namely the right-wing bloc, the left-wing bloc, and the centrist bloc. Additionally, there's 2 blocs representing minority groups in Israel, the non-Zionist Ultra-Orthodox Bloc and the anti-Zionist Arab Bloc. Neither of those fits easily into the usual right-left paradigm. Here's the breakdown of the 20th Knesset, which was elected in March of 2015. As you can see, there are 120 seats total, and that number is fixed. The right is the largest bloc, followed by the left, then the center bloc, and last, the ultra-Orthodox and Arab blocs. So what do these blocs stand for exactly? While there are, of course, differences between parties within each bloc, they tend to align strongly on at least 2 of the 3 major issues of Israeli politics that we mentioned earlier in this video. Here we have a chart showing how each bloc tends to relate to the 3 major political issues in Israel. The left-wing bloc generally favors left-leaning policies across the board, from dovish foreign policy to very liberal religious reforms to supporting a more socialized economy. Similarly, the right-wing bloc tends to favor right-wing or conservative measures across the board, including hawkish positions on security and greater market involvement in the economy, though there are some exceptions on the issue of religion and state. The center and Orthodox parties, however, are more complicated, mixing left and right-wing policies on various issues. Now let's take a more detailed look at each of the 5 blocs. The politics of the Israeli right can most easily be thought of as security, settlements, and capitalism. Needless to say, this makes the Israeli right, which is dominant in Israeli politics, totally anathema to the shrinking Israeli left, which finds less and less common ground with the right. The Israeli right is the largest bloc with 44 seats divided amongst 3 parties. The Israeli right, which has been dominant in Israeli politics since 1977, is generally hawkish across the board on both security issues and territory, from the West Bank and relations with the Palestinian Authority to Iran and Hezbollah. It tends to support less government intervention in the economy and favors more free market reforms. The issue of religion and state is more divisive, however, with many of those on the Israeli right being secular, including the bulk of Avigdor Lieberman's Israel is Our Home party, many of whom favor relaxation of the religious status quo. The Israeli left used to be by far the largest bloc in Israel, but it won only 29 seats in the 2015 elections. The Israeli left is made up primarily of socialists, including the small Meretz party, and social democrats like the Labour Party. The left-wing bloc tends to be dovish, particularly on the future of the West Bank, strongly supporting the formation of a Palestinian state. The left believes the government needs to intervene more actively in the economy to redistribute wealth via greater taxes and welfare funding. The left also tends to favor greater secularization, and it's very socially progressive. Up till now, the right and left blocs have been pretty straightforward, and not much different from how people in the US and Europe think of right and left. The remaining three blocs, however, are a bit more confusing, since they mix elements of both the right and left. The centrist parties are a great example of this. Large center parties like Dash in 1977, Shinui in 2003, Kadima in 2006 and 2009, and Yesh Atid in 2013 and 2015 have all tended to be moderate on foreign policy, often favoring the establishment of a Palestinian state on the West Bank and the evacuation of some Israeli settlements. They've also supported changes in the religious status quo, yet they've all generally supported economic reforms, lowering taxes, reducing government spending and welfare, and increasing privatization. The ultra-Orthodox parties also defy the standard right-left paradigm. The ultra-Orthodox population tends to be poorer than the country as a whole and more dependent on welfare programs, so it's not surprising that the ultra-Orthodox parties strongly favor greater wealth redistribution and government intervention in the economy. They are generally moderate on foreign policy issues. On religion and state, they support either maintaining the status quo understandings or increasing the role of Jewish tradition in public life and the use of ultra-Orthodox standards for state-run religious courts and conversion programs. So unlike the religious right in the US, which tends to be conservative across the board, the ultra-Orthodox are socially conservative, fiscally socialist, and moderate on foreign policy. The Arab Bloc stands out as the only anti-Zionist group of parties in Israel. These parties have little in common besides their shared rejection of Israel as a Jewish state and their collective Palestinian identity. In 2015, all the Arab parties ran together on a joint list which included the Israeli Communist Party, a secular nationalist party, and the Islamic movement in Israel. While all three of course favor erasing the state's Jewish character, their broader views on religion and state vary greatly, from the Communist Party's secular outlook to the Islamic movement's fundamentalist Islamic positions. Lastly, we have the outsiders, the exceptions to the rule that occasionally manage to make it into the Knesset. Occasionally there are other smaller individual parties which tend to not only defy the right-left paradigm, but also don't clearly fit into any of the political blocs. Some nationalistic religious parties, for instance, sit somewhere between the right-wing bloc and the ultra-Orthodox bloc, typically sharing the right's emphasis on hawkish foreign policy, while embracing ultra-Orthodoxy's socialist economic positions. Other examples include single-issue parties, which occasionally manage to enter the Knesset. The best-known single-issue parties include the Greenleaf Party, whose sole purpose is the legalization of marijuana, the Holocaust Survivors Party, and the Pirate Party, which supports legalizing online piracy of copyrighted intellectual content. Every once in a while, one of these parties makes it in, as the Pensioner Party did in 2006. That's all we have for today. If you like this video and want to learn more, check out our website at dcandjerusalem.com.